Good evening everyone and welcome to tonight's session. Just a kind of activation video from me and then you'll be over to your department areas to have a conversation. And tonight we're looking at instruction and we're thinking through the lens of our students with SEND. Okay, so we said right at the beginning of our CPD this term that we were kind of one of our goals this year is to make sure that we're all sort of speaking the same language and that our CPD is kind of grown from the ECF, the Early Careers Framework, which our early careers teachers are experiencing firsthand, and that all of us through that golden thread of teaching should be familiar with. It should be informing our CPD planning. And so this term we're looking at both, we have looked at both behaviour and instruction because we're just slightly lapping the ECT's programme. They're going to move on to instruction from January onwards. So we're just coming slightly ahead of that just to introduce those ideas to all of us as we're working together. So in the instruction strand for the early careers teachers, it focuses in the instruction strand on lots of different aspects of teaching and good instruction. But in particular, I wanted to draw your attention to three ideas. So explicit teaching, the key idea there that we can, as teachers, provide instruction, we can deliver in the earliest part of the instructional sequence our instructions, our ideas, our explicit thoughts and processes that we're going to go through with students. We are also introduced to scaffolding, which is such an old technique that we'll have been using for years if we're longer career teachers, but there's such an emphasis on scaffolding within this strand for the ECTs. So the idea of effective scaffolding, providing students with the knowledge and the guidance to access challenging content, but the idea that scaffolds should be removed. And if you were at one of the research Twilights that we looked at, scaffolding is one of the focuses that I had on one of those research Twilights. And the final idea that I wanted to draw your attention to was memory. So in the instruction strand, we're reminded that memory is just such an important part of pupil learning, and that teachers really need to understand that memory is, we're building on cognitive architecture of how our brains work. And so the design of our instructions, how we give instructions to students, how we have that early explicit teaching needs to be sensitive to the fact that our working memory is very limited, can only hold sort of 5 to 7 items at a time, will be forgotten within about 30 seconds unless it's moved into any kind of practice part of the process. And that long-term memory, a change in long-term memory, that is what we will define as learning. So sort of being sensitive to memory when we're thinking about delivering instructions is a key tenet of what we're trying to look at tonight. Okay, so we're basing tonight's session on, there's a guidance report on the EEF website for lots of different things, and one of the guidance reports that they published was on educational needs that are special for certain students. And this guidance report, there's a huge amount to cover. Anna Meta recently shared with me a teacher SEND handbook which has been released, and that's also extensive, and we'll be working with these two documents periodically over this year and obviously into future CPD as well. And in this guidance report covers sort of 5 basic this is the summary poster, 5 ideas of what is best practice for our students with SEND. And what we see is that ensuring our students with SEND have high quality teaching, that is a key sort of recommendation of the EEF research. So let's look at that in a bit more detail, this third strand, high quality teaching. Now our students with SEND, let me move myself out of the way, come on, oh no, I should make myself bigger, move out of the way, there we go. Our students with SEND, there are 5 recommendations. This is kind of boiling down obviously a vast and unwieldy and complex beast into 5 significant recommendations, and there you see it again: scaffolding for our students with SEND, explicit instruction, and the cognitive metacognitive strategies that our students need to be guided through. And so it's the same language, it's what I've been saying all along. We're seeing this same repeated language across what the early careers teachers are getting. I've seen this in our what our ITT trainees are getting. It's here in the recommendations from the EEF. So I want to just cover those three. I've missed off for now flexible grouping and use of technology. I think there are two other big ones to look at another time. Okay, so tonight the way I'm going to, I'm covering Slade's face here. The way I'm going to sort of introduce some of this guidance report to you is through a blog which was written by their senior associate, Kirsten Mould. And what Kirsten takes us through is as follows. She sort of purports, and quite rightly, that high quality teaching for our students with SEND is high quality teaching for all. Gone are the days where it's sort of, I've planned my lesson, got my resources, now what do I do for my students with SEND? You know, it's not a separate entity, it's not a separate part of this process. So having a sort of sharp, well-defined repertoire of approaches, which is that toolkit we should all be sort of building and polishing, we should really guard against ever saying, we do this, I know how to do that. We're always learning, we're always refining. But that well-defined repertoire will help to ensure that high expectations are maintained and next steps are well informed for pupils with SEND and that they can thrive through that process. So the scaffolding is broken down, just a reminder to us all that scaffolding is that sort of metaphor, that temporary support. We remove it when it's no longer needed. Now, obviously, for students with SEND, we might be looking to keep that scaffold in place a little bit longer. We might be looking to reintroduce that scaffold at times when the student is feeling vulnerable or times when perhaps the pressure is increasing. So the scaffold is perhaps more flexible for our students with SEND, but it's still the same process that's going to benefit everybody. Explicit instruction, again, just to remind us what that means, it's a range of teacher-led approaches where we demonstrate, we instruct, we tell our students. Now, you know, the negative side of that is that people get the wrong impression that it's sort of lecturing or sort of teaching by just telling or this transmission teaching, when actually it's a teacher input. It's the crucial part of the learning process that the expert in the room tells the learners in the room what to do, what a good one looks like, what the pitfalls might be. You look in that key processes box there, talking about the misconceptions, highlighting where things can go wrong. And the final sort of strand we said there is about cognitive strategies. Now, one of the most important things for us to understand is that working memory is very, very, very limited. It's got about 5 or 7 items that it can hold, that it is about 30 seconds before things disappear in that working memory. And we're trying all the time to move our students into having long-term memory change, that is learning. Within sort of being aware of those sort of cognitive overload or those sorts of areas within the cognitive architecture, we also need to be aware of talking through this with students, thinking about what we're learning is kind of the teaching part of it. The metacognitive part is thinking about how we're learning and being alert and aware to the processes of self-regulation, recall, talking through and making the implicit explicit for our students. There's a bit more there. If you wanted to click that link when you get this PowerPoint, you could dig into metacognitive strategies a bit more. Okay, so we know, don't we, that it's all well and good to say, great teaching for SEND, it's going to be great teaching for all. But actually, where do we need to be just a bit more flexible? Well, we need to respond to the needs of our students. Our students with SEND are going to have very individual and sometimes extremely complex needs. And it's important that we respond to those needs, that we think about the content, the particular barriers of your subject area, the particular barriers to the output and the outcome that you're trying to get those students to work towards. We have to be aware that with some of our students, this is going to be a slightly longer process. We're going to have that intensity for longer because they might not be able at the beginning of that process to move on to the next stage at the same time as perhaps students who are not experiencing those special educational needs. And we need to be flexible. Like I said before, we need to just be aware that we might have to change our strategy, reintroduce a strategy that we no longer thought we needed, and so that the student is able to be sort of in that flexible dialogue with us about what's working. Okay. So tonight, going to have time to read the blog. I've sort of built that in so that you've got time in this session to read, and your curriculum leaders are going to kind of guide you as to whether they want to do that, you know, pair up and read to each other or private reading, whatever you want to do. It's only short. And then once you've read that blog, There's just some time to discuss in your departments, where does this impact on your strategies? Where does this impact on your schemes of learning? You might want to use these questions to prompt this discussion. So you might want to think, are there particular units where for our process, actually scaffolding isn't really central yet? Or, oh, I've got a great scaffold for this, but I haven't shared that with the department. Is it refined? Does it need some refining? Do any of us in the room feel that we need reassurance that we can do what was for so long kind of lambasted as, chalk and talk? Actually, this is best practice. We should be talking to our students. We should be explicitly instructing them, demonstrating, sharing our knowledge. That is best practice. Do we need reassurance for that? And as a team, are we sort of take the temperature a little bit? Do we understand cognitive architecture? Do we understand how our students learn? Do we know the ways that barriers can present themselves simply from the process of working in the working memory as opposed to moving through into the long-term memory? So maybe a discussion around that might be really, really fruitful. Tonight you can log this session onto Blue Sky. It is already loaded for you as a session that you can sort of say that you've attended, and then you can put your evaluation onto there as well if you want to. At some point I'm going to sort of better train you on the Blue Sky aspects that we haven't had a chance to go over just yet, including how to log CPD. Okay, I hope that's helpful. I hope that kind of gets you thinking, and I hope that for tonight that gives you something very meaningful. Spend your hour after school when you're tired, when you've had 5 lessons and a form and a duty, that you're able to actually just think about your wonderful practice in the classroom. Take care, folks. Thank you.